One choice. One moment. One love story. Welcome to When He Chose Her. Enjoy the story. The people with the least are often the first to give everything away. The rain came down in silver sheets over Manhattan, turning the streets into rivers of blurred headlights and trembling reflections. Inside Bellamy's diner, the warmth smelled like burnt coffee, grilled onions, and exhaustion. Clara Bennett wiped down table 14 with slow movements, her shoulders aching after 11 straight hours on her feet. The old wall clock near the kitchen read 11:47 p.m. Almost midnight. Almost closing. Almost another day survived. "You still alive over there, Bennett?" yelled Louise from the grill without looking up. Clara glanced toward him and raised a tired thumbs up. Physically? Debatable. A weak laugh escaped him. The diner was nearly empty now except for a truck driver asleep in booth 6 and a college kid typing furiously into a laptop beside a cold stack of pancakes. Outside, the storm kept getting worse. Wind rattled the windows hard enough to make the neon open sign flicker. Clara tucked a loose strand of blonde hair behind her ear and reached for the small paper bag sitting beside the register. Her dinner, or technically breakfast now. Half a turkey sandwich wrapped in wax paper and a bruised red apple she'd taken home from the employee bin before someone threw it away. She hadn't eaten since noon. Her stomach twisted painfully just looking at it. "Take the food before Louise does," her manager shouted while counting receipts. "That man would eat the napkins if we grilled them." "Already considered it," Louise yelled back. Clara smiled faintly, grabbed her coat, and walked toward the door. The bell chimed softly as freezing air rushed inside. Manhattan hit her all at once. Rain, sirens, steam rising from subway grates. The city never really slept. It just shivered differently after midnight. Clara stepped beneath the diner awning and finally unwrapped the sandwich. The smell alone almost made her dizzy. Then she saw him. An older man sitting against the building 2 doors down. Thin blanket. No gloves. Gray beard soaked from the rain. He looked past exhausted. The kind of tired that lived deeper than sleep. Clara froze for half a second. Her fingers tightened around the sandwich automatically. Hunger was a selfish thing. It made your brain negotiate with your conscience. You worked 11 hours. You barely paid rent this month. You need this. But then the man coughed into shaking hands, and that was the end of the argument. Clara walked toward him quietly. "Hey," she said softly. The man looked up slowly, startled. Clara crouched beside him and handed over the paper bag. Turkey sandwich. Apple's ugly but still emotionally supportive. For a moment, he simply stared at the food like it wasn't real. "Miss, this is yours." "Was," Clara corrected gently. "Now it's yours. But what about you?" She leaned back against the cold brick wall beside him with a crooked smile. "I have caffeine and unresolved childhood issues. I'll survive." The old man let out a rough laugh that turned into another cough. Clara waited while he unwrapped the sandwich carefully, almost respectfully, like someone opening something fragile. People walked past without looking. They always did. New York trained people not to notice pain unless it interrupted traffic. Across the street, a black SUV sat motionless beside the curb. Nathaniel Whitmore watched everything through rain-speckled glass. He'd stopped at the intersection nearly 2 minutes earlier when the traffic light malfunctioned during the storm. But the light had changed already. His driver noticed first. "Sir." Nathaniel didn't answer. His eyes stayed fixed on the waitress beneath the awning. The oversized coat. The worn sneakers. The way she smiled at the homeless man like giving away her only meal was the most normal thing in the world. Nathaniel had spent 20 years around people who performed generosity like theater, charity galas, cameras, giant checks, strategic kindness. But this had no audience. No reward. No calculation. Just instinct. "Do you know that diner?" he asked quietly. His driver checked the mirror. "Bellamy's? Cheap coffee. Good pot." Nathaniel almost smiled. The billionaire founder of Whitmore Capital sat silently in the back seat while rain traced slow lines across the window. He should have been thinking about tomorrow's merger meeting. About investors. About numbers with too many zeros attached to them. Instead, he found himself staring at a waitress who looked colder than the man she'd just fed. Clara stood again, rubbing her hands together against the freezing wind. The old man called after her just before she turned away. "Miss?" She looked back. "Thank you." Clara smiled softly. Small. Real. Someone once did the same for me, she said. Then she disappeared back inside the diner as thunder rolled over the city, and the black SUV remained parked in the rain long after the street had emptied. Nathaniel Whitmore had not slept more than 40 minutes by the time dawn spread pale gray light across Manhattan. The city outside his penthouse windows looked cold and distant beneath the rain clouds, but his mind remained trapped beneath a flickering diner awning and the image of a waitress handing away the only food she had. He stood barefoot in the kitchen of his $30 million apartment, staring at untouched espresso while the skyline glowed weakly beyond the glass. "Cancel my 8 o'clock, he said suddenly. His assistant nearly choked through the speakerphone. "Sir, the Zurich call has been scheduled for 3 weeks. Then they can survive another day without me." Silence. "Understood." Nathaniel ended the call and loosened his tie with visible irritation. He hated being distracted, especially by strangers, especially by women. His entire life had become a machine built on discipline, numbers, acquisitions, meetings. Every emotion organized into neat little compartments that never interfered with profit margins. But somehow a waitress with tired eyes had walked straight through all of it without even noticing. He crossed the penthouse slowly and pressed a button near the fireplace. Seconds later, another voice answered. "Good morning, Mr. Whitmore. Find someone for me." "Of course." Nathaniel hesitated for the briefest moment. "Her name is Clara Bennett. She works nights at Bellamy's Diner on West 47th. What would you like to know?" Nathaniel stared at the rain sliding down the windows. "Everything." 2 hours later, Clara Bennett was balancing 3 coffee mugs in one hand while trying not to fall asleep standing up. Morning customers moved through Bellamy's in noisy waves. Construction workers, office assistants, exhausted nurses finishing overnight hospital shifts. Clara smiled through all of it automatically, her body functioning on habit and caffeine alone. "You look terrible," Louise informed her while flipping pancakes. "Thank you. I moisturize." "Seriously, Bennett, your face says emotionally haunted Victorian orphan." Clara poured coffee into a mug without looking up. "That is the nicest thing anyone has ever said to me." Louise laughed hard enough to nearly burn the bacon. Clara liked mornings less than nights. Morning people expected enthusiasm. Night people just wanted honesty and pancakes. She moved toward booth 9 when the diner television suddenly switched from weather reports to financial news. A familiar face appeared on screen instantly. Nathaniel Whitmore. Sharp navy suit. Cold blue eyes. The kind of face magazines called powerful because they were too afraid to call it lonely. "Whitmore Capital prepares for another billion-dollar acquisition this quarter," the anchor announced. Clara glanced up for exactly 1 second before continuing to refill orange juice. "You know who that is?" asked a waitress beside her. Clara shrugged. "Rich guy? Expensive haircut. Probably emotionally unavailable." The waitress snorted. "He is like the Batman of Wall Street." Batman smiled more. Across town, Nathaniel sat inside the back seat of another black SUV while scanning a file on his tablet. Clara Bennett, 27 years old. No criminal record. No social media accounts besides an abandoned piano channel from 6 years earlier. Current employment included Bellamy's Diner, weekend shifts at a bookstore in Brooklyn, and occasional piano performances at the 59th Street subway station for extra cash. Nathaniel frowned slightly. "Juilliard. 1 semester." His head of security replied from the front seat. "Dropped out after her mother got sick. Medical debt wiped out the savings." Nathaniel kept reading. Every line made less sense somehow. "Volunteers. Twice a week at a literacy center. Pays partial rent for an elderly neighbor upstairs. No dating history anyone could find. No wealthy friends. No hidden trust fund. Just work. Constant work." "There is more," the security chief added carefully. Apparently, she turned down financial assistance from multiple charities after her mother passed. Nathaniel looked up slowly. "Why?" She told them another family needed it more. Silence filled the SUV. Outside, Manhattan traffic crawled through puddles and steaming sidewalks. Nathaniel leaned back against the leather seat, staring at Clara's grainy employee photo attached to the report. In the picture, she was not smiling, but her eyes looked steady, calm, like someone who had learned how to survive disappointment without letting it poison her. "Sir," the driver asked quietly. Nathaniel closed the tablet. "Give me Bellamy's address." "You are going there personally?" Nathaniel adjusted the cuff of his suit slowly. "No," he said. That would be insane. The driver nodded. Understood. A long pause passed. Then Nathaniel looked back out the rain-covered window. Have the limousine ready by tomorrow morning anyway. Clara Bennett discovered the limousine at 7:12 the next morning while carrying 2 trash bags and a dangerously oversized coffee out of her apartment building in Hell's Kitchen. She stopped so abruptly that coffee splashed onto her sleeve. The black stretch limousine sat directly beside the curb like something from a movie about rich people making terrible emotional decisions. Every neighbor within a 50-foot radius was already staring. Mrs. Romano from apartment 3B nearly dropped her tiny dog. Clara, the elderly woman whispered dramatically from across the sidewalk. Please tell me you did not join organized crime without inviting me. Clara blinked twice. I cannot even organize my laundry, Mrs. Romano. The driver stepped out smoothly in a dark tailored suit, while Clara stood frozen beside the building entrance looking like a confused substitute teacher. Miss Bennett, the driver asked politely. Depends who is asking. He handed her a cream-colored envelope embossed with silver lettering. Clara stared at it suspiciously. That looks expensive. I do not trust paper that thick. Mrs. Romano gasped loudly behind her. Open it before I die. Clara sighed and carefully unfolded the card inside. Miss Bennett. Breakfast. 8 o'clock. No obligations attached. Nathaniel Whitmore. Beneath the message sat the address of one of Manhattan's most exclusive hotels. Clara looked up slowly. This is either a kidnapping or a tax audit. Mr. Whitmore requested your presence only for breakfast, the driver explained calmly. He also asked me to assure you this is not a cult. Clara narrowed her eyes. That is exactly what a cult would say. Upstairs, someone opened a window. Clara, yelled a neighbor. If you disappear, blink twice. Clara rubbed her forehead, while Mrs. Romano grinned like she had just discovered live television. Go, the older woman whispered. Worst case scenario, you get free pancakes. 20 minutes later, Clara sat stiffly inside the limousine, gripping her coffee cup like emotional support equipment, while Manhattan slid past the tinted windows in silver morning light. She had changed clothes 3 times before leaving the apartment. Every outfit somehow screamed either exhausted waitress or witness protection program. Finally, she settled on dark jeans, boots, and a blue sweater that made her feel slightly less terrified. The driver remained professionally silent while Clara kept glancing around the luxury interior. This car is larger than my apartment, she muttered quietly. There is a button for curtains. That feels unnecessary. Across town, Nathaniel Whitmore stood near the private dining room window, adjusting his cufflinks for the 3rd time in 5 minutes. He hated uncertainty. Yet somehow he had invited a waitress he barely knew to breakfast like a man starring in a midlife crisis commercial. You are nervous, his assistant observed carefully while setting down a tablet. Nathaniel gave her a cold look. I am never nervous. You reorganized the silverware twice. He glanced at the table. The forks were perfectly aligned. That fork was aggressive. His assistant hid a smile. Of course, sir. Nathaniel exhaled slowly and looked toward the city below. Part of him still could not explain why he cared. Clara Bennett should have become another passing image in another forgettable New York night. But she lingered somehow. Quietly. Persistently. Like music stuck inside his head. The elevator doors finally opened at exactly 8:03. Clara stepped into the dining room cautiously, instantly overwhelmed by marble floors, crystal chandeliers, and a pianist softly playing near the fountain downstairs. Nathaniel turned toward her and nearly forgot how to speak for half a second. She looked nothing like the women who usually filled rooms like this. No designer labels. No calculated perfection. Just soft blonde hair still damp from rain outside and intelligent green eyes already scanning the room for exits. Clara noticed him immediately. Tall. Impossibly composed. Navy suit tailored like armor. The kind of man newspapers described with words like ruthless and visionary. Yet somehow he looked more uncomfortable than she felt. Miss Bennett, Nathaniel said smoothly as he approached. Clara folded her arms. Before this continues, I would like to clarify that if this turns into human trafficking, I bite. To Nathaniel's complete surprise, he laughed. A real laugh. Short but genuine. Clara looked mildly shocked herself. Oh no, she said softly. He has emotions. Nathaniel pulled out a chair for her beside the window overlooking Central Park. Breakfast. Clara sat carefully while eyeing 6 different forks arranged beside the plate. Honestly, I already miss diners where the forks do not outnumber the customers. Nathaniel smiled again despite himself. And for the first time in years, breakfast no longer felt like another business meeting. Clara spent the first 4 minutes of breakfast trying to understand why one table needed 3 different spoons. She stared down at the polished silverware beside her plate, while waiters moved silently around the private dining room like professionally trained ghosts. "Why does this spoon look wealthier than me?" she asked quietly. Nathaniel nearly smiled into his coffee. "That one is apparently for grapefruit." Clara blinked. "People have a dedicated grapefruit lifestyle." He leaned back slightly, watching amusement flicker across her face. It surprised him how quickly the tension in the room shifted around her. Most people became performative near him. Too polished. Too eager. Clara Bennett looked at a 5-star hotel the same way she looked at a subway delay. Mild inconvenience. A waiter approached carefully. "Miss Bennett, would you prefer the Belgian waffles or the truffle eggs Benedict this morning?" Clara looked horrified. "Those are both breakfast foods." Nathaniel lowered his cup to hide another laugh. "The waffles are safer." "Thank you," Clara whispered to him. "I grew up eating cereal that turned the milk blue." The waiter retreated while Nathaniel studied her quietly across the table. Morning light spilled through the massive windows behind her, softening the exhaustion beneath her eyes. Up close, he noticed little things he had missed that night in the rain. Tiny burn mark near her wrist, probably from diner coffee. Fainting stain on her thumb. No expensive jewelry. No carefully crafted image. Just honesty. It felt strangely rare. Clara caught him staring. "You know this is how documentaries begin before billionaires hunt humans for sport." Nathaniel raised an eyebrow. "Do I seem like someone who hunts people?" "Emotionally? Absolutely." He laughed again before he could stop himself. The sound surprised both of them. Nathaniel Whitmore did not laugh during breakfast meetings. Or lunch meetings. Or most of his adult life. Clara noticed it too. "Wow," she murmured while sipping coffee. "You really have not smiled in a while, huh?" The question landed softer than he expected. Nathaniel glanced down briefly at the table. Occupational hazard. Silence settled comfortably for a moment while rain tapped lightly against the windows. Down below, Central Park glistened beneath the gray morning sky. Clara finally set down her cup carefully. "So," she asked, "why am I here?" Nathaniel looked at her directly. No rehearsed answer came to him. That irritated him more than it should have. "I saw what you did the other night." Clara frowned slightly. "At the diner. You gave away your dinner." She shrugged immediately. Like it meant nothing. "It was half a sandwich. It was all you had." Clara looked down at her hands for a second. "He needed it more." Nathaniel stared at her quietly. There it was again. That simple answer. No performance. No attempt to sound noble. She genuinely did not think she had done anything special. "Most people would not have done that," he said finally. Clara leaned back in her chair. "Most people are tired. And you are not." She smiled faintly. "Oh, I am exhausted. I just try not to let it make me cruel." The words hit him harder than any boardroom argument he had heard in years. Nathaniel looked away briefly toward the city skyline, while something unfamiliar twisted quietly in his chest. Clara picked at the edge of a napkin. "Listen, Mr. Whitmore, Nathaniel. That sounds expensive." Still Nathaniel. She sighed dramatically. "Fine. Nathaniel. I appreciate breakfast. Truly. But if this is some kind of rich guilt project, you can relax. I am not secretly dying or raising 6 children in a shoe factory." Nathaniel shook his head slowly. "I did not bring you here because I pity you." Clara studied him carefully then. For the first time, the humor softened from her expression just enough for him to glimpse something deeper beneath it. "Caution." "Then why?" she asked quietly. Nathaniel hesitated. "Dangerous thing, honesty. Especially for men like him. Because I cannot stop thinking about you." The words escaped before he could reorganize them into something safer. Clara froze with her coffee halfway to her lips. Somewhere downstairs, piano music drifted softly through the hotel lobby. Nathaniel almost regretted saying it. Almost. Clara slowly lowered the cup onto the table. "That," she said carefully, "is either incredibly romantic or the beginning of a true crime podcast." To his complete surprise, Nathaniel smiled wider than before. Real this time. Warm enough that even Clara looked caught off guard by it. Outside, the rain finally began to slow, And for the first time in years, Nathaniel Whitmore realized he was not thinking about stock markets, mergers, or profit margins at all. He was thinking about the waitress across from him whose sweater sleeves were slightly too long and whose kindness somehow made his entire world feel embarrassingly small. For the next 3 days, Nathaniel Whitmore became deeply annoyed by how often he thought about Clara Bennett. She appeared everywhere. In elevators, during meetings, in the reflection of conference room windows while executives discussed billion-dollar acquisitions with terrifying enthusiasm. "Sir?" one board member asked carefully during a presentation. Nathaniel blinked once. "Repeat the last 10 seconds. The executive swallowed nervously. Nobody at Whitmore Capital was accustomed to seeing their billionaire founder distracted, especially not by thoughts of a waitress who joked about grapefruit spoons. By Thursday afternoon, Nathaniel finally did something completely irrational. He put on a gray hoodie, dark jeans, and sneakers that cost less than $400 for the first time in years. His assistant stared at him in visible horror. "Sir," she said slowly, "you look approachable." Nathaniel looked offended. "Fix your tone." 30 minutes later, he stood awkwardly inside a crowded downtown subway station, trying very hard to appear normal. It was not going well. A teenager bumped into him without apologizing. Someone stepped on his shoe. A violinist nearby was somehow playing jazz and Christmas music simultaneously. Nathaniel hated all of it immediately. Clara had mentioned during breakfast that she played piano near the 59th Street station some evenings for extra money. Nathaniel told himself he was simply curious. Nothing more. Certainly not behaving like a man starring in a romantic comedy against his will. He finally spotted her near the far tunnel entrance beside an old black piano that looked one emotional conversation away from collapse. Clara sat quietly beneath the fluorescent station lights, wearing fingerless gloves and a long charcoal coat, while soft music drifted through the station around her. People slowed without realizing it. Some smiled. Some simply stood still for a moment before continuing home. Nathaniel remained several yards away, watching silently. She played beautifully. Not showy. Not dramatic. Just honest. The kind of music that sounded like loneliness learning how to breathe again. Then Clara looked up mid-song and froze. Her eyes narrowed instantly. Nathaniel straightened awkwardly. Clara stopped playing completely. "Why?" she asked loudly across the station. "Are you dressed like a divorced substitute teacher?" Several commuters turned to stare. Nathaniel walked toward her, trying to maintain dignity while carrying absolutely none of it. "I am blending in." Clara looked around the station slowly. "With what?" He sat carefully beside the piano bench. "You said I needed to experience normal life. I said rich people panic when the subway smells mysterious." Right on cue, a train screeched into the station with enough noise to shake the floor. Nathaniel visibly flinched. Clara pointed at him immediately. "There. That. Billionaire fear." Against his better judgment, Nathaniel laughed again. It was becoming dangerously easy around her. Clara resumed playing softer this time, while Nathaniel watched commuters drop folded dollar bills into the piano jar. A little girl nearby spun happily in circles while listening. Clara winked at the child without missing a note. Nathaniel noticed everything. The patience in her smile. The way she greeted strangers like they mattered. The fact that she played expensive classical pieces for people too exhausted to know their names. After 20 minutes, Clara finally closed the piano lid gently. "Okay," she said. "You survived public transportation. Congratulations." Nathaniel stood beside her while commuters rushed around them in cold evening air. "Can I walk you home?" Clara looked suspicious immediately. Do billionaires usually stalk women through subway stations? Only exceptionally sarcastic ones. She tried not to smile and failed slightly. They walked 6 blocks together through Manhattan while light snow began falling between the buildings. Nathaniel listened more than he spoke. Clara told stories about difficult customers at Bellamy's. About Mrs. Romano upstairs trying to set her up with a retired dentist who owned 7 parrots. About learning piano from her mother on an out-of-tune keyboard rescued from a church basement years ago. Then halfway across 48th Street, Nathaniel suddenly reached into his coat pocket and froze. Wallet gone. Phone gone too. Clara stared at him. "You got robbed." Nathaniel looked genuinely offended. Apparently. Clara burst into laughter so hard she had to stop walking. "Oh my God. The city ate you alive in under 2 hours. This is not funny." "Nathaniel." Someone stole from you while you were trying to cosplay middle class. He rubbed his forehead in frustration, while Clara continued laughing beside him beneath the falling snow. And strangely enough, hearing her laugh felt better than winning most business deals ever had. You know what your problem is? Clara asked while they stood beneath the glowing subway sign on 48th Street. Snow drifted softly around them, catching in her blonde hair and melting against Nathaniel's dark coat. Nathaniel looked deeply unimpressed. I am sure you are about to tell me. You walk around Manhattan looking like your blood type is private equity. He stared at her. That is not a real sentence. And yet you understood it immediately. Clara was still laughing about the stolen wallet while Nathaniel stood with the calm expression of a man trying very hard not to declare war on public transportation. Someone committed a crime against me, he muttered. Someone saw a man holding a subway pole, like it personally offended him, and reacted accordingly. Nathaniel exhaled slowly through his nose while Clara smiled up at him beneath the streetlights. God help him, she was beautiful when she laughed. Not in the polished magazine cover way he was used to seeing at charity galas or business dinners. Clara looked real. Warm cheeks from the cold. Wind tangled in her hair. Green eyes bright with amusement instead of calculation. Nathaniel had spent years surrounded by people trying to impress him. Clara Bennett seemed completely uninterested in the project, and somehow that made him want to stay near her longer than he should. Come on, Clara said finally. You probably need coffee before you accidentally buy the subway system out of spite. 20 minutes later, they sat inside a tiny 24-hour coffee shop tucked between a laundromat and a bookstore. The place smelled like cinnamon, espresso, and old jazz records. Clara wrapped both hands around a chipped ceramic mug while Nathaniel looked wildly out of place beneath the faded Christmas lights hanging year-round near the ceiling. The cashier nearly dropped a tray after recognizing him. Nathaniel noticed immediately. Do not, Clara warned quietly. Do not what? Do billionaire magic where suddenly everyone gets nervous and starts calling you sir like you are invading a small country. Nathaniel leaned back slightly. You make me sound exhausting. Clara took a sip of coffee. You are exhausting, but interesting. The words settled between them softly. Nathaniel looked at her for a moment too long. Clara noticed and glanced away first. Dangerous. That was becoming the problem. The waitress who lived in a tiny apartment and wore fingerless gloves had somehow become the calmest part of his week. Nathaniel reached into his coat pocket slowly and slid a folded piece of paper across the table. Clara frowned. What is this? An apartment. She blinked once. Excuse me. Upper West Side. 2 bedrooms. Paid for. Clara stared at him silently. Nathaniel continued carefully. You should not be working 3 jobs just to survive. I can help. Her expression changed instantly. Not angry. Worse. Hurt. She looked down at the paper for several seconds before folding it neatly again and sliding it back across the table. Nathaniel, it is not charity. Then what is it? He hesitated. Honest answers felt strangely difficult around her. I do not know, he admitted quietly. I just know you deserve better. Clara smiled faintly then, but sadness touched the corners of it. That is kind, she said softly. But no. Nathaniel frowned immediately. Why? She looked out the coffee shop window where snow dusted the sidewalks silver beneath the streetlights. Because if kindness becomes a transaction, it stops feeling like kindness. Silence. The jazz record crackled softly overhead while Nathaniel stared at her across the tiny table. Clara traced the rim of her coffee mug slowly. You saw one moment outside a diner and decided I needed saving. You do? No, she said gently. I need sleep. Better health insurance maybe. Less emotional damage. But I do not need someone rescuing me because they feel guilty for having more. Nathaniel looked down at his untouched coffee. Nobody spoke to him like this. Not employees. Not investors. Not anyone. Yet somehow Clara's words did not feel cruel. They felt true. That was the dangerous part. Clara reached across the table suddenly and nudged his hand lightly with one finger. Hey. He looked up. Buying breakfast was nice, she said quietly. Walking through the city with me was nice. You do not have to turn every feeling into a solution. Nathaniel stared at her hand resting near his for a brief second before she pulled away. His chest tightened unexpectedly. Outside, snow continued falling over Manhattan while traffic lights glowed red against the dark streets. Clara glanced toward the clock behind the counter and sighed dramatically. I have to be at Bellamy's in 5 hours. Nathaniel stood immediately. I will drive you home. You literally do not have a wallet. I still own cars, Clara. She laughed softly again, and Nathaniel realized with quiet alarm that he would probably spend the rest of the night trying to hear that sound one more time. 3 nights later, Nathaniel Whitmore sat alone in the back corner of a subway station pretending not to wait for Clara Bennett. It was 11 degrees colder than the week before, and Manhattan carried that exhausted January silence that only appeared after midnight. Commuters moved past in heavy coats with their heads down while old trains screamed through the tunnels like tired metal ghosts. Nathaniel checked his watch for the 4th time in 6 minutes, then immediately got irritated at himself for doing it. You are behaving strangely, his driver had informed him earlier that evening. Nathaniel had responded by sending the man home. Because unfortunately, the driver was correct. Across the platform, Clara finally appeared carrying a battered black piano case and 2 paper grocery bags balanced awkwardly against her hip. Nathaniel stood automatically before realizing how ridiculous that looked. Clara noticed instantly. Wow, she called across the station. You came voluntarily this time. Nathaniel took one of the grocery bags from her before she could protest. I was nearby. Clara looked around the nearly empty station slowly. Nathaniel, billionaires are never nearby subway tunnels after midnight. Perhaps I am evolving. Into what? I am still workshopping the concept. She smiled softly while unlocking the old station piano. Tonight, she looked more tired than usual. Nathaniel noticed the faint shadows beneath her eyes immediately. Long shift, he asked quietly. Clara nodded while flexing her fingers against the cold. Double shift at Bellamy's. Mrs. Romano also trapped me for 40 minutes to explain why her cat is emotionally manipulative. Nathaniel sat beside the piano while Clara adjusted the bench slightly. And is it? Absolutely. That cat has the psychological warfare skills of a small dictator. Nathaniel watched her carefully as she began playing. The music tonight sounded different somehow. Slower. Heavier. The station noise faded quietly beneath the melody while commuters unconsciously slowed their steps again. A little boy stopped beside the piano holding his father's hand. An exhausted nurse closed her eyes briefly while listening. Clara played like she was giving people somewhere softer to exist for a few minutes. Nathaniel realized he had never met anyone who carried sadness so gently. When the final note faded, the station remained strangely quiet for a moment before life resumed around them. Clara looked down at the piano keys instead of at him. My mother used to love that one, she said softly. Nathaniel stayed silent. Something in her voice told him not to interrupt. Clara smiled faintly without humor. She said music makes lonely people feel less invisible. Nathaniel leaned against the piano carefully. Was she a musician too? Clara nodded once. Piano teacher in Queens. Terrible cook. Incredible woman. Snow swirled faintly near the subway entrance while Clara traced one finger along the edge of the piano keys. When she got sick, I dropped out of Juilliard. Nathaniel's chest tightened slightly. Clara continued before he could speak. Everyone always makes that face. What face? The sad rich person face. He almost objected, then realized she was right. Clara laughed quietly under her breath. It is fine. Life happens. Hospitals are expensive. Cancer is very rude. Nathaniel looked at her carefully. She said the word cancer with the same calm tone she used discussing subway delays or broken coffee machines. Like she had already carried the grief long enough for it to become part of her posture. You never went back? He asked softly. Clara shook her head. By the time she passed away, survival felt more practical than dreams. Silence settled between them again. Somewhere deeper in the station, a saxophone player started practicing scales badly enough to qualify as emotional warfare. Clara smiled despite herself. New guy, she muttered. He sounds like tax fraud in instrument form. Nathaniel laughed quietly before his expression softened again. You still deserve your dreams, Clara. She looked at him finally then. Really looked at him. The cold billionaire mask people feared so much had disappeared weeks ago around her without Nathaniel even noticing. Now he just looked tired. Honest. Human. Clara reached over suddenly and fixed the crooked collar of his coat. The movement caught both of them off guard. Her fingers brushed lightly against his neck before she pulled away too fast. For one suspended second, neither of them spoke. The station noise faded into the background again. Nathaniel's heartbeat felt embarrassingly loud. Clara cleared her throat first and looked away toward the tracks. You know, she murmured softly. Most rich men just buy sports cars during emotional crises. Nathaniel smiled slowly while watching snow drift beyond the station entrance. I considered that, he admitted. Then I met a waitress who insults me professionally. And for the first time in a very long time, Clara Bennett laughed without sounding tired at all. By the second week of February, Manhattan had started whispering about Nathaniel Whitmore. Not about mergers. Not about acquisitions. About the woman suddenly appearing beside him in places no one expected. The waitress. The subway. Pianist. The girl with thrift store coats and sharp green eyes who somehow made the coldest billionaire in New York look almost happy. Clara hated every second of the attention immediately. That woman on television called me mysterious, she complained while wiping down tables at Bellamy's. I work 14-hour shifts and own exactly one decent bra. There is nothing mysterious happening here. Louise nearly dropped a tray laughing. You are dating a billionaire now. You legally have to become mysterious. I am not dating him. MMHM. Clara pointed a coffee pot at him threateningly. Louise, you smiled at your phone yesterday. That proves nothing. You also burned toast while smiling at your phone. Clara froze. We do not discuss the toast incident. Across town, Nathaniel stood inside Whitmore Tower adjusting his tie, while his assistant watched with visible amusement. You have changed your tie 3 times, she observed. Nathaniel frowned. This one looks arrogant. Sir, all your ties look arrogant. He stared at his reflection briefly before sighing. Tonight, Whitmore Capital hosted its annual winter gala at the Astoria Ballroom. Politicians, investors, old money families pretending not to hate each other over expensive champagne. Normally, Nathaniel endured these events like a man surviving dental surgery. Tonight, he only cared about one thing. Clara had agreed to come. Barely. 1 hour. She warned him over the phone earlier that day. If anyone says the phrase wealth management unironically, I am leaving. Reasonable. Also, if someone serves food smaller than my thumb. That is fair. Now, standing beneath crystal chandeliers while Manhattan's elite filled the ballroom in silk and diamonds, Nathaniel checked the entrance every few minutes despite himself. Then suddenly the noise around him faded. Clara stepped through the ballroom doors wearing a dark blue dress simple enough to look effortless and elegant enough to make several conversations stop mid-sentence. Her blonde hair rested loosely against her shoulders while uncertainty flickered briefly across her expression. Nathaniel forgot how to breathe for approximately 3 seconds. Clara spotted him across the ballroom immediately and walked toward him slowly beneath the soft golden lights. Several wealthy guests openly stared, not because she looked out of place, because somehow she did not. Nathaniel met her halfway across the room. You came, he said quietly. Clara glanced around nervously at the sea of luxury surrounding them. I almost escaped twice. His eyes moved over her gently. You look beautiful. Clara smiled faintly. Careful. Compliments from rich men usually come with yachts. Nathaniel laughed softly while offering his arm. Across the ballroom, whispers moved through the crowd almost instantly. Who is she? Is that the diner waitress? Nathaniel ignored all of it completely. For the first time in years, he genuinely did not care what the room thought. Clara noticed eventually, though. She always noticed everything. Your people are staring, she murmured under her breath while accepting a glass of sparkling water from a waiter. They are not my people. Before Clara could answer, a tall woman in a silver designer gown approached with the sharp smile of someone professionally trained to be unpleasant at charity events. Nathaniel, she purred smoothly before turning toward Clara. And who is this? Clara opened her mouth politely, but the woman continued first. Actually, let me guess. New assistant. The insult landed softly but deliberately. Clara immediately straightened slightly, ready to deflect it with humor like always. But Nathaniel spoke first. Calm. Cold. Clear enough that nearby conversations stopped instantly. This, he said while looking directly at Clara instead of the other woman, is the most interesting person in this room. Silence. The woman's smile faltered visibly. Nathaniel continued without even glancing at her. And for future reference, Clara belongs here far more than most people pretending to. Clara looked up at him in complete surprise. Something shifted quietly inside her chest then. Something dangerous. Warm. Real. The woman retreated awkwardly moments later while Nathaniel guided Clara toward the ballroom balcony away from the noise and cameras and expensive laughter. Snow drifted softly over Manhattan. Beyond the railing while the city lights glowed beneath them, Clara folded her arms against the cold night air. You really embarrassed her. Nathaniel stood beside her quietly. Good. Clara laughed softly under her breath before looking out over the skyline. You know, she admitted carefully, a few months ago I thought people like you lived on another planet. Nathaniel turned toward her slowly. And now? Clara looked at him for a long moment beneath the falling snow. Now I think you are just lonely people wearing expensive watches. Nathaniel smiled faintly. That might be the nicest thing anyone has ever said to me. The music from the ballroom echoed softly behind them while snow landed gently in Clara's hair. Nathaniel reached up instinctively and brushed one snowflake from her shoulder. His fingers lingered for one impossible second too long. Clara's breath caught slightly. So did his. And somewhere beneath the lights of Manhattan, two people from completely different worlds stood dangerously close to falling in love. 1 year later, the little cafe on West 52nd Street smelled like espresso, cinnamon, and fresh piano polish. Snow drifted softly outside the windows while warm yellow lights reflected against the glass. A handwritten sign near the register read Bennett & Company. Music and coffee. Beneath it, another smaller sign added piano lessons upstairs every Saturday for neighborhood kids. Clara Bennett stood behind the counter wearing a dark green sweater dusted lightly with flour while trying not to laugh at the disaster unfolding beside the espresso machine. Nathaniel, she said carefully, the milk is smoking again. Nathaniel Whitmore stared at the steaming pitcher with visible betrayal. The machine is aggressive. Clara folded her arms. The machine has survived 6 years without incident. You have been here 11 minutes. He looked down at the ruined latte art in silence. It was supposed to be a heart. Clara peeked into the cup. It looks like a nervous potato. Somewhere near the front window, Mrs. Romano cackled loudly enough to startle 2 customers. I told you. The elderly woman announced proudly to anyone listening that man was born emotionally incapable of making cappuccino. Nathaniel adjusted the sleeves of his rolled-up dress shirt with the exhausted dignity of a billionaire losing a fight against dairy products. His Swiss watch still cost more than most cars parked outside. Yet somehow he looked happier standing behind Clara's coffee counter than he ever had inside Whitmore Tower. Clara walked over beside him and gently took the pitcher from his hand. Here, she murmured softly. Wrist looser. Nathaniel watched her fingers guide the movement carefully while warm jazz played through the cafe speakers overhead. Every customer in the room knew exactly who he was. But nobody cared anymore. Not here. Inside Clara's cafe, Nathaniel Whitmore was simply the tall man hopelessly in love with the owner and deeply feared by espresso foam. Better? Clara asked. Nathaniel looked at the cup. The foam actually resembled a heart this time. Barely. I remain unconvinced this is real coffee science. Clara smiled up at him softly. You bought 3 buildings last month, but milk confuses you. Buildings do not hiss at me. The cafe door opened suddenly, bringing in a rush of cold evening air and a group of neighborhood children carrying sheet music folders. Clara's entire face brightened instantly. Nathaniel noticed the change the same way he always did. Completely. Miss Clara, one little girl asked excitedly. Are we practicing Christmas songs today? Clara nodded. Only if you promise not to play them at double speed like last week. The children laughed while climbing upstairs toward the tiny music studio above the cafe. Nathaniel watched quietly as Clara greeted every single child by name. A year ago, she had been surviving double shifts and subway performances just to stay afloat. Now she had built something entirely her own. A cafe, a music space, a place warm enough for lonely people to breathe inside for a while. Nathaniel had offered to buy her a massive restaurant downtown when she first mentioned the dream months earlier. Clara refused immediately, then compromised only after he agreed to become a silent investor with absolutely no control over the business. I know your type, she warned him then. You alphabetize feelings. Somehow she still said yes when he asked if he could stay anyway. The evening rush slowed gradually while snow covered the sidewalks outside in soft white layers. Near closing time, Clara finally sat beside Nathaniel at the piano near the cafe window. The same old station piano now restored beautifully after he secretly paid for repairs and pretended he had nothing to do with it. Clara discovered the truth almost immediately, of course. She always did. You know, she murmured while playing a quiet melody. Most billionaires buy yachts during their midlife crises. Nathaniel leaned against the piano beside her. I considered that. Clara smiled without looking up from the keys. And instead, Nathaniel watched her hands move across the piano slowly. Watched the woman who gave away her last sandwich without hesitation. The woman who taught children music upstairs for free every Saturday. The woman who somehow dismantled his entire lonely empire just by being kind inside it. Instead, he said quietly, I fell in love with a waitress. Clara's fingers paused softly against the piano keys. The cafe grew still around them. Snow fell peacefully beyond the windows while warm light wrapped around the empty tables. Nathaniel reached for her hand carefully like it was something precious. Because it was. Clara looked at him for a long moment before smiling that small real smile he loved more than every skyline in Manhattan. Good, she whispered. Then she leaned forward and kissed him gently while soft piano notes lingered beneath the sound of snowfall outside. And somewhere between the coffee cups, the music lessons, the subway songs, and the ruined cappuccinos, Nathaniel Whitmore finally discovered something money had never managed to buy him before. A home. If this story touched your heart, please like, share this video, and let us know where you are watching from. And subscribe to When He Chose Her channel for more emotional billionaire love stories filled with kindness, dignity, and unforgettable moments. Your support helps us create more cinematic stories about unexpected love, quiet strength, and the people who change lives with simple acts of compassion.